Thank you all for joining. My name is Andy Gaines. I'm the Executive Director of Ashby Village, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to today's Elder Action presentation of Yes on Proposition 15. We're going to learn a lot about it, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our guest, Ben Grieff, who is deeply involved in advocating for this proposition and has a lot to share with us. So looking forward to hearing. This is particularly close to me and my heart. As I mentioned to Ben when I got on, I have kids in 2nd and 5th grade, and the schools right now are severely challenged with the financial hit of the pandemic, and so additional resources in that area is very welcome. I wanted to just share, that during the shelter in place, Ashby Village has been really actively working with and supporting our members, building community, giving transportation to essential needs, getting food, and all sorts of stuff. And it's been really satisfying to hear the level of support that people are receiving. Last month, many of you might have been with us, but we had a big celebration on July 26th of our 10th anniversary. And it was a 30-minute presentation that was very, very profound for me and for many of us, to just talking about our history, where we've come from, showing a new 5-minute film that we've made, and hearing some stories. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I really encourage you to do so. You can just go to our homepage on our website and click on the link there. So over the last many months, with the new issues of equity and inclusion happening in our culture, in our country, Ashby Village has really stepped into that in a deep way. And I just got off a call with our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the board. We've hired a professional to work with us. And we're really looking at creating a whole plan for how Ashby Village can really step forward and both address our individual and our collective issues and challenges and the opportunities for greater inclusion. So really wanted to name that. And along with that, Ashby Village has a subsidized membership fund that we are really committed to making our programs and services available to everyone in the community. And so we provide reduced fee memberships to low-income older adults. And so we're definitely looking to support from the community to make this possible. Our membership dues cover about 60% of what we need, the revenue needed to operate the village, and the balance comes from gifts from individuals. So just in terms of today, this event is free. It's coming from the Elder Action Interest Group, and we really want to share it, but we really welcome any of you to step forward to give a donation and support our programs. And you can do that online, and there might be something in the chat box for you to click. But regardless of that, I'd like to just welcome you, and I want to pass it over to someone who's going to be continuing either from Elder Action or regarding Ben to do an introduction.
Thanks, Andy. It's Irene. Hi, my name is Irene Marcos, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We're very excited to have Ben Grieff here. I'm a member of Ashby Village and of the Elder Action Task Force. Elder Action is a social justice interest group. At Ashby Village, we welcome elders from the wider East Bay community to join us. You don't need to be a member of Ashby Village to join our task force. Members of Ashby Village Action advocate for political reform and social justice issues that affect us directly, as well as those affecting the broader community. We're very pleased to have Ben Grieff with us today. He'll be talking to us about the importance and the ultimate benefits of voting yes on Prop 15. Rochelle Lefkowitz, Ashby Village board member and Elder Action co-chair, will be introducing Ben. Ben's talk will take about 30 minutes. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions in the chat box. Meryl Gerhardt, Elder Action Task Force member and tech team chair, will be reading your questions for Ben to answer. Rondi Saslow, Prop 15 Task Force member, will be making the closing remarks today. Not with us on our Zoom stage today, but equally important are the other members of our Prop 15 Task Force. They are Roberta Pressman, Joanne Carter, and Roberta Spike. Rochelle?
Thank you, Irene. And thanks to all of you who are joining us here this afternoon. Today we've come together. Yes, we're apart, but thanks to Ashby Village's Elder Action today, we're not alone. Today we've come to learn about one of the votes through which we can have the most impact in California this fall. It is my honor and delight this afternoon to introduce you to our speaker. Ben Grieff's not the kind of public interest leader who leaves you thinking, I couldn't possibly be as powerful a spokesperson as he is. No, Ben does something far more unusual and far more effective. Ben believes in us. He knows that we are the best people to inform and engage people who already trust us. So he equips us with key facts and just the words and images we need to inspire everyone we know to vote yes on Prop 15, also known as Schools and Communities First, like members of our book groups or churches or synagogues, our friends and families, neighbors and former coworkers, starting with the other members of our village and of the other 60 plus villages throughout California. A member of Prop 15's executive committee, Ben is the campaign director for Evolve California, a San Francisco nonprofit that he helped found in 2011. For the past 7 years, Ben has led Evolve's campaign to restore funding for California's public schools by reforming Prop 13. His work has helped change the political narrative around a once untouchable issue for decades called the third rail of California's politics that has been the root cause for California's public education system being drastically underfunded for decades. So how did we meet first at this issue and with Ben? Back in December of 2018, Irene Marcos and I attended a gathering with one of Prop 15's top strategists. Anthony Thigpen of the LA-based California Calls made the case back then for schools and communities first. As of that day, we knew that this was a campaign that Ashby Village Elder Action had to join. Some of us had gone to California schools when they were among our nation's finest, and many of us built careers on that solid foundation. It made us want to help revitalize our state's schools as our legacy to our descendants and for all future students. Soon we were invited to St. Mary's Church to the social hall in Oakland. And there, in a diverse crowd of Bay Area supporters, we first met and frankly were wowed by Ben's clarity and energy. We first heard Ben tell a room full of people of all ages and backgrounds that we had what it takes, and we could help secure $12 billion, that's billion with a B, every year for our state from big corporate property owners for our schools and communities. When 4 of us from Elder Action entered that room that day, we were greeted like long lost family. Why? Well, we, the older middle and upper middle class women, many of us homeowners, certainly many of us voters, are the very voters that the ballot measure's wealthy corporate opponents are trying to scare into voting against it. Luckily, we are old enough to know better. And we've got Ben. Big corporate landowners may spend billions, actually may spend millions to save billions for their balance sheets. But meanwhile, Ben has been giving millions of Californians the tools that we need to help pass Prop 15. That day, we came knowing that we had the time, experience, energy, and passion for social justice. But we left confident that we could stand up to the scare mail in our mailboxes and the Facebook feeds and to all sorts of lies and tough questions. Today, thanks to Ben Grieff, you will leave here with many of your questions answered, but especially these 2. First, what can I say to get more people I know to vote yes on 15? And second, what can I do before the 2020 election to make sure I have reason to celebrate Prop 15's passage this year? Well, lucky you, Ben is about to answer those questions. He will do that to all the questions that we enter in the chat box on our screens, and he'll give all of us the information that we need to help pass Prop 15 and to make California history this fall. Okay, Ben, you're on.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. I certainly appreciate that introduction. Thank you all for being here. Thank folks from Elder Action and Ashby Village for being, such great partners in this campaign. I am always excited to talk about this issue with folks, but I'm especially excited to talk with folks who might remember when Prop 13 passed in 1978 and have a different relationship with, sort of the Howard Jarvis movement and sort of what that's meant for California for that time. I'm from Seattle. I was not here when that happened. And, I always like to let people know when I was younger, we always had such a great affinity towards California public education. It was always sort of this idea that it was so well funded. The UC system was, the best public education, higher education system we have in this country. And it was sad when I moved here about 12 years ago to sort of find it not the way that I thought it was. And that was just so sad. And to really see and then sort of, work in this space around education funding and to see that, the root of this has really been what happened in 1978 and this big corporate loophole that folks didn't even realize. So I definitely look forward to going through a presentation here and then answering any questions that you all might have around this. And, we've heard a lot of questions over the years and should hopefully be prepared to give you good answers that then you can go out and share with all your friends and family that are thinking about voting on this in November. So I'd like to share my screen here. Just give me a moment. There we go. So Schools and Communities First is what we've called our campaign for years. And then back at the end of June, we got our official ballot number. So we're Prop 15, which is really great. We're just the second proposition on this November statewide ballot. So it's a nice, easy one for folks to remember. I want to really emphasize this because if you remember one thing from what I'm going to talk about over the next little less than an hour or so, is that Prop 15 maintains all protections for all residential properties. Right? That's the most important, the number one thing to remember for folks is if you have a home that you live in, if you have a home that you run a small business out of, if you have a home that you rent out on Airbnb, if you have a home or several homes that are, vacation properties, nothing will change about your property taxes. If you are an apartment owner and you own a giant apartment building with 10,000 units, or if you are an apartment owner that owns a small 2-unit building, nothing will change about your property taxes. Right? This is specifically crafted to make sure that all Prop 13 protections are kept for homeowners and all residential properties of any kind, mobile homes, live workspaces, assisted living facilities, anything where people live will be protected. But what this won't continue to protect are these large commercial property owners. So specifically, an example we always use that some of you I'm sure have seen in the past is Disneyland. Disneyland is one of these iconic properties that is still paying 1975 levels of property taxes, right? And meanwhile, the average California homeowner is paying 8 times more in property taxes than Disneyland. And that doesn't make any sense, right? That's not what Prop 13 was all about. But what we've seen over the years is that we have this situation where commercial property owners are getting away with being drastically undertaxed, even though, the Walt Disney Corporation, as you can see here, has, made $59 billion last year. So they can certainly be affording to pay their fair share of property taxes. Chevron is another example. Chevron is undertaxed by over $100 million every single year because they've owned a lot of their own gas stations. They've owned their oil refineries, their oil fields, their office property since prior to 1978. And so this is the type of loophole that we're talking about closing. You know, Prop 13 was put in place to protect people. It will remain in place to protect people, but these large corporations aren't people. But it's just, you know, not the large commercial or the corporations really. We're really talking about other commercial property owners. You know, people ask, how is this possible? Well, it's possible because when homes change hands, they're reassessed, right? People move, people pass away. You know, actually in California, homes change hands on average every 10 years. But these large commercial properties that we were talking about rarely, if ever, change hands. So this means that they avoid paying their fair share of property taxes. And what I often tell people is that unless we change this law, unless we close this loophole, you know, when my great grandkids are taking their great grandkids to Disneyland, Disneyland's still going to be paying 1970s property taxes. And that just doesn't make any sense. This is a great example that we always like to share with folks, because it's not just the Disneys or the Chevrons or the big name companies. This is Michael Dell. He was the founder of Dell Computers. He bought a property in Santa Monica for $200 million. Because at the time he was the 18th richest person in the world. And as you can see here, what he was able to do is split up the purchase of the property between himself, his wife, and a LLC. And he did that because under current law, unless a property is transferred, unless over 50% or more of the property is transferred to one person or entity, it doesn't technically change hands. So as you can see, Susan Dell only owns 49% of the property. So 50% was not transferred over. And so the 18th richest person in the world, when he bought this property, was able to save $2 million a year in property taxes. And this is why this is so important, right? This is not what Prop 13 was about. This loophole needs to be closed because it's also something that's not available to homeowners. You know, I cannot buy a home with Irene and Rochelle, and we couldn't split it up somehow between the three of us to avoid paying our fair share. That's not how residential property works, but that's certainly how commercial property can work. And so that's why we're working to change this. It's these kind of egregious examples that are happening all across this state, and it's costing our schools and our communities billions every year. But this makes no sense either, right? Not only is it unfair, not only is it robbing our schools, but here are some buildings that we have in Oakland. And as you can see, all of the buildings are paying different amounts per square foot in property taxes. Now, this is just the taxes they're paying on the land. So this doesn't have to do with how big or how new a property is. All of these properties, for folks that are familiar with the area, are within a 2-block radius of 12th and Broadway. And so what we're seeing here is different property taxes being paid by different commercial property owners purely based on when they purchased the property, which makes no sense. So you have 1330 Broadway, they're paying their fair share at $472 a square foot because they purchased their property more recently. But then we see Bank of America building, they're paying $71 a square foot in property taxes. And that just makes absolutely no sense, right? And so what we need to see in our state in order to generate reliable, stable revenue is all of these large commercial property owners paying the same amount based on what the land is actually valued at, not based on when they purchased the property. I like to talk about the fact that Prop 13 was supposed to keep all of our taxes down. It was part of an anti-tax revolt that Howard Jarvis started and really swept across the country. But unfortunately, what it's done is it's given a small number of large commercial property owners who happen to own their property, 40 years ago, a huge tax break, while the rest of us have had to pay more. Right now, we have the highest income tax rate in the country, the highest sales tax rate in the country, the second highest gas tax rate in the country. And as you all know, year after year, we're asked to vote on local revenue measures just to have a minimally acceptable standard for our parks, or our roads, or our libraries, or our schools. And this is something that is often not talked about enough, right? We have lost $150 billion over the last 40 plus years from this corporate loophole. Right? Imagine what we could have done with that money. And instead, we've been forced to nickel and dime individuals and working families and small businesses just to keep the lights on with some of our things that used to be funded through the property tax that commercial property owners were paying. And this is just an unstable system. What we see since November 2012 here is that on average, local revenue measures have passed, or about 75% of local revenue measures have passed every year. In November elections, in primary elections, you can see here, anywhere from 71% to 83% pass rate. But what we saw in March in the primary is that we had an enormous drop off. And what I honestly fear is that people are feeling too nickel and dime now. People are feeling like, oh my gosh, I have so many more local revenue measures that I'm supposed to be voting in favor of. More sales tax increases, more parcel taxes and bond measures that are not property tax increases per se, but they are increasing our taxes, right? Parcel tax is something that we really invented here in California because of what we have with our commercial property tax system. And so this is a really big deal, because this is how we have been able to make ends meet for the last 40 years. And now what we're seeing prior to COVID, right, and also during a contested Democratic primary, we saw a 39% pass rate, right? And that's something for all of us that care about our schools and care about our community services. We should really be taking this in mind and saying, there has to be a better way. And so what we're advocating for is that a better way is by passing Prop 15 and supporting schools and communities first in November. So specifically, our initiative reclaims up to $12 billion a year. Roughly 40% of that revenue will go directly to our local school districts. Roughly 60% of the revenue will go to our local communities. So that goes to counties, that goes to cities, and that goes to special districts like AC Transit District or BART District, or your fire district or your water district. Again, this protects all residential property completely. And it simply closes these loopholes that we've had in our commercial and industrial property tax system for almost half a century. But also something important to note is that this initiative does benefit small business in giving the largest tax break for small businesses in a generation. What we're specifically doing with this initiative is we are going to eliminate the tax on personal business equipment for the vast majority of small businesses in California. Specifically what that tax is it's a cumbersome tax. It's a tax when you talk to small business owners, they don't like having to do this. Every year they have to count up all their business equipment. So if you're in a restaurant, it's your cutlery, it's your tables, your chairs, your ovens, your pots, your pans, your refrigerators, all of that. You have to depreciate that value and then pay a tax on that. It's brought in up to $1 billion every year in California, but it's also the perfect example of how we've had to nickel and dime because we're not getting stable, reliable revenue from large commercial property owners. So we're going to be eliminating that tax on the first $500,000 of business equipment. So that eliminates it for most businesses in California, and is, like I said, the largest tax cut in a generation for small businesses in California. But also our measure ensures strict accountability and transparency. So every year, local governments, once Prop 13 is enacted, will get their share of this revenue, and they will have to say, this is what we did with it. So we're very, very important that we have accountability with this money as well. And this is local money. So when you're talking to folks about this, make sure they know this is not money that's going into the black hole of Sacramento, right? This is money that is going to our communities and our schools, because property tax money is local money. That's how we can show here how much money we're estimating each county will receive. So it's quite a bit of money for the Bay Area. And again, this is revenue that we gain for our local schools, our local communities, without having to increase taxes on ourselves. So very, very important. So I've given all of, my, positive pro Prop 15, propaganda, if you will. But I always like to take time to make sure that we address some of the concerns that we're hearing from our opponents. And, I've been doing this presentation for quite some time. And now that we're at the point where we're getting closer to the election, we're just seeing, quite honestly, flat out lies from the opposition, like what we've never seen before. And I think when you're talking to your folks, when you're talking to other people that are homeowners and a little bit nervous about this, I think it's really important to ask them for a moment to consider the source. Where are they hearing these things from? Where are they hearing that somehow this is going to change property taxes for homes? Where are they hearing that this is going to cause all businesses to leave California? Where are they hearing that this is going to increase the price of gas and other goods and services? Right? And really the truth is they're hearing it from interests that do not align probably with their California values. They're hearing it from people that are against any tax increase ever. They're hearing it from people who believe we have plenty of funding for education right now, even though we're 39th in the nation in education funding. Being the 5th largest economy in the world, we're still at 39th. And we're really hearing it from people who, like I said, just don't match California values right now. I try not to get too partisan with this, but we are going to have a big election coming up, and the vast majority of people are not going to be supporting Donald Trump. The vast majority of people are going to be supporting Joe Biden. So if you know people that are supporting Joe Biden and don't like Trump, we're talking about the people spending money against our campaign are the same ones that are supporting Devin Nunes and Kevin McCarthy and these other folks that support the agenda of Donald Trump. These are not people that are supporting our California values and are really looking out for what's best for us. So we know this is not going to affect homeowners. What they say is there's a slippery slope to that. As someone that's been doing this work up and down the state for the last 7 years, I can assure you that is not the case whatsoever. And no organization is talking about doing anything on the residential aspect of Prop 13. Quite honestly, it's more popular now than ever. It passed with 64% of the vote in 1978, and it's more popular now if you look at the polls. So even if there was an organization that wanted to cobble together the money and collect the signatures, then they still would have to go and convince a majority of voters, of which are homeowners, to actually vote to take away their property tax protections. So the idea that this is somehow a precursor to anything to do with the residential property is completely ludicrous. The other two main things they're going to say is, first, they're going to say that this is going to cause businesses to leave. And the best stat to give them on that is that of the $12 billion we're talking about, 92% of that revenue will be coming from just 10% of commercial property owners in California. So the idea that this is just a blanket increase in taxes on all businesses or even all property owners is a complete lie. Because if you think about it, there has been so much new development that has gone on over the years. There has been actually properties that have changed hands legally and not using that sort of Michael Dell loophole. And there are just a smaller and smaller number of commercial properties that have not been reassessed for the last 30 or 40 years. And so those are the properties that are going to be having to pay their fair share. But this is not something that is a blanket tax on all businesses. I often talk to folks in the Bay Area about the Transamerica Pyramid versus the Salesforce Tower, right? The Transamerica Pyramid, until it was recently sold this year, was not paying its fair share. Salesforce Tower, which is, as we all know, very new, is paying its fair share, right? All of the tech companies and all of the sort of the job creators of today and tomorrow in the Bay Area, they're not benefiting from this loophole, right? All the land Google's buying up in San Jose, the Apple's second campus, Facebook's campus, or all the area that Facebook rents in San Francisco, they're paying fair market value in rents, and they're paying fair market property taxes on all the land that they own. So this is only a small number of commercial property owners that aren't paying their fair share. And the other big argument that they try to peddle is that somehow this is going to increase the costs of goods and services. Again, if it's only affecting a small number of commercial property owners, it can't affect all the prices of goods and services. But more importantly, this is something that has not been passed down to us. This is something that these commercial property owners like a Chevron are taking their tax savings and they're keeping it to themselves. We have examples of gas stations all across the state, just like this one here, or these two, where one gas station, a Chevron, is paying $15 a square foot, while the gas station right across the street is paying $124 a square foot. So that doesn't make any sense, right? That's fairly anti-competitive for these two gas station owners. But if you'll notice, the price of gas at the Chevron is more. And we see this time and time again. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of examples like this all across the state. So these tax savings are not trickling down to us. We're not the ones benefiting from this, right? We also look at the price of milk. You know, the price of milk at Trader Joe's in the Bay Area is roughly the same, no matter what Trader Joe's you go to, no matter if the Trader Joe's is new or has been there for 20 years. Because prices are not based on property taxes that a commercial landowner pays. Prices are dictated by the free market. That is very, very important, especially when we're talking to our more conservative friends that like to talk about the free market. This corporate loophole in Prop 13 is the very definition of government regulation of the free market. It gives a leg up to some commercial property owners just because they happen to be fortunate enough to purchase their large commercial property years ago. So really important to be sort of understanding these types of arguments and sort of knowing how to refute them. You know, people say, oh, this is going to make rents go up for all small businesses. It's like, well, if this corporate loophole was keeping commercial rents down, we would have the lowest commercial rents in the country, wouldn't we? But we don't. Because again, the price of rents are based on the market, not based on the property taxes that the commercial property owner is paying. What we want to be talking to people about is how Prop 15 benefits all of us. Right? This is money for our roads, for our libraries, for our emergency services, money that can put towards affordable housing, towards public transportation, and to filling our potholes. You know, it's absolutely egregious that, you know, we're the 5th largest economy in the world and we have to drive on the roads that we do, right? This is local money to fund local services, right? That's what's so great about this. This will absolutely benefit all of us in so many ways that, again, without increasing our property taxes. So this is where we want to drive the conversation, is this is a lot of revenue for the things that we want and we need and we all deserve, without raising our taxes. Finally, you really want to remind people, because people don't know, that our property tax system right now for commercial property is very unique, right? When Prop 13 passed in 1978, there were 43 copycat measures that passed in the 2 years after that, all across the country. You know, 43. You know, Ronald Reagan, and I alluded to this earlier, he wrote in his autobiography that Howard Jarvis started a prairie fire, an anti-tax revolt all across the nation. But not one of those 43 copycat measures included commercial property. Right? So I'll say that again, not one of those copycat measures included commercial property, because that doesn't make any sense for people, right? That's not what Prop 13 was about. That's not why other people in the country wanted to pass property tax protections for. So what we are advocating for is just for our state to have the same commercial property tax system that they have in Oklahoma or Alabama or Mississippi or Florida, right? Or other much less progressive places than we like to think of ourselves as in California. This is common sense. It's just straight down the middle. And it's why we have so much support from so many people in California and across the country on this. We have the support of the teachers. We have the support of the firefighters. We have the PTA has endorsed this, the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, the Democratic Party of California, and of course, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, right? Barbara Lee, the people that we know, the people that we trust and support are supporting this. Right? It's the folks on the other side that are behind the no campaign. So when anyone is really unsure, I always tell them, well, what organizations, what elected officials do they know and like and trust? Where are they on this issue? And that's why it's really important to mention to people who's on our side versus who's on their side. So I want to wrap up here in a moment and start to take some questions. But I definitely want to remind people again, if there's one thing you remember from today, it's that Prop 15, maintains all protections for all residential property. So don't believe the lies, don't believe the scare tactics. Let your friends and your family and your neighbors know that this is just to put our state on par with how the rest of the country taxes large commercial property. And this is something that will be great for our communities. It's something that's long overdue. And especially now, especially right now, when we're talking about two big things. One is, how do we recover from COVID? We really have two options: continue to increase taxes on ourselves, which we mentioned before is not particularly popular prior to COVID with the March 3rd election results, or do what every other place in the country does and fairly tax large commercial property. But the other really important thing to mention is how this loophole does not hurt all of our communities equally. And this is really about equity as well as tax fairness. This is a situation where a community in Palo Alto or in Marin or in Piedmont, they are able to raise the revenue that they need to provide a minimally acceptable standard of education for their communities, or provide minimally acceptable community services for their communities. But a community in Richmond, a community in Modesto, right, a community out, further in the Central Valley, they do not have those same resources. They cannot rely on the PTA fundraising. They can't rely on education foundations, and they can't rely on passing local revenue measures. And so when we're talking about how this loophole has affected all of California, it certainly has. We have all suffered, but certain communities have suffered more. So when we talk about equity, when we talk about wanting to do what we can in California to make things better for everyone, we have to start with Prop 15. So I'll pause there and take any questions that anyone might have.
Well, thanks, Ben, so much for an outstanding presentation. It was really clear. There is a lot of interest, so I'll start with questions in order. Felix asks, what are the positions of the governor and state legislators on Prop 15?
That's an excellent question. I was going to end with that, but if you noticed, there was one notably absent person on the list there of Democratic leaders, and that was Governor Gavin Newsom. Ooh. And so we are working to get him on board with this. One of the things that we're asking folks to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is to sign a petition to Governor Newsom urging him to support this. It is quite frankly very disappointing he has not come on board with this. He is very familiar with the issue. When he was running for governor, he supported this issue. But because it has been known as a third rail, because this has to do with Prop 13, he's being extraordinarily cautious on this. And, quite honestly, this, and I know folks on this call helped immensely to collect the signatures that we needed to get this on the ballot. And the reason we had to do that painstaking work is because our leaders in Sacramento do not have the political courage to take this on. So they are the last ones, unfortunately, that we ever expect to be supportive of this. But at the same time, we can show people like the governor that this is something his constituents really support, that we want to see. And we will think less of him if he does not come on board supporting this common sense change. I will add, though, that we do have the endorsement of the President of the Senate, Tony Atkins, as well as the Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon. So we do have, more support from the legislative side, but unfortunately, we're still waiting for the executive to get on board.
Okay, and I'm going to be posting a list of potential actions that you suggested to us at the end of the chat. So, and that includes the link to the petition to Governor Newsom that you just referenced. So Margot asked, Ben didn't mention public health as a possible beneficiary of community money. Will there, is that in this Proposition 15 structure, support for community health?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'm glad you mentioned that. That was an omission on my part. And the great thing about this money is it is all local money. So local communities can decide what they would like to do with this money. And one of the things that has been decimated for the last 40 years have been our county hospitals. We've seen so many county hospitals close, and that's because they're funded through the county, which are also funded through property taxes, which we have not seen that property tax money come in like we used to in the old days. And so, yes, this is something where, public health will benefit immensely. I mean, you almost kind of think about it, anything that we use every day will benefit from this. Nothing sort of nationally, right? Nothing, but just sort of on our everyday life, walking down the street, sort of how we interact with our communities, that will all benefit from this. So great question.
And maybe I'll ask a question just as a follow-up to your answer. The ways that monies flow from property taxes to the state and then back to communities is very complicated. What mechanisms will be used? What policies are built into Proposition 15 to manage the flow of money and the distribution of money?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we often tell people we're not going to change any formulas. We're not going to change how we're just adding more money to the pie. And so we know that this money on the school side is going to flow through the local control funding formula, which is the current law of the land. If that were ever to change, then it would flow differently. But the local control funding formula is an equity formula that ensures that the areas that need more revenue for schools, that have a lot of English language learners, that have a lot of low-income learners or foster youth, that those areas are the ones that will receive the most funding. But every school district will receive more funding in this. And on the county side, there are already built-in formulas. So if we're talking, roughly, say, $500 million coming into, say, Contra Costa County, that the county itself will get, roughly $80 million from that. Right. Okay. And that this city of, Walnut Creek will get, $15 million every year. So okay. The formulas won't change, just the amount of money going to the formulas.
Just the amount of money. Okay. And I'm going to continue with the questions, although I see that Tony asked a very similar question to mine. So Tony, add to the chat if you feel that Ben's answer was not quite what you were looking for. And Sue, you had a similar question as well, specifically about distribution of revenue to schools. But I think, Ben, you've answered that question, that the formulas for the allocations are already set, and that's not the function of Prop 15. So Sue, please add if you need more clarification. A couple people are asking about the presentation. Yes, I assume this is being recorded, and the recording of the presentation will be posted. And the slides, I don't know if there's a plan to post just the slides as well, or if they're available on the Evolve website as a standalone.
Yeah, if certainly the recording side, whatever everyone at Elder Action and Ashby Village decide is fine with me. In terms of the slides, if anyone is interested in the actual physical slides, they can certainly reach out and we can provide those.
Okay. Roberta comments, or maybe it's a question, not sure. Is there support from Tony Thurmond?
Yes, there certainly
Yes.
is.
So yes, I would assume
Yes.
so, and would be concerned if there weren't.
Yeah, great question.
Margot asks, Prop 15 is directed at large businesses, not small businesses. What's the cutoff between the two?
Yeah, excellent question. So this will establish regular reassessment of non-residential commercial properties that are valued at over $3 million. So if you own a commercial property that's valued at under $3 million, nothing will change for you. You will sort of fall into that residential category of continuing to have your Prop 13 protections. But if your property is valued at more than $3 million, that is when you will have to pay fair market value property taxes.
Okay. So Sue asks again as a follow-up, she just, and you can clarify or repeat if that's what the clarification is. She's asking if low-income schools or school districts will get more than higher income schools.
That I believe is the idea of the local control funding formula is yes.
Okay, okay. So, okay, another question. Is the $3 million cutoff as currently assessed or at market rate? How will the value be determined?
Yeah, so that will be at market rate, and then that will increase every year with inflation as well.
So there's a plan for reassessments annually.
There's a plan for probably the reassessment will be every 3 years. Most states do every 1 to 5 years. So ours will most likely be every 3 years. It's actually up to the legislature.
But with increases in between those
yeah,
reassessments.
exactly. So one day all properties will be more than $3 million. And so the $3 million will start now, and then it will increase with inflation, that the cap or the exemption.
Okay. So that is our last question. Oh, here comes another. I am sure that people have more questions. How is your opponents? No, I'm sorry. No, how is Prop 15, the advocacy for Prop 15 being funded, and who are the key funders of those who oppose?
So our campaign is being funded by community groups, faith-based organizations, labor unions. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative has supported. So that's sort of on our side, who are the big funders. And then the opposition side is mostly the real estate industry or other large business interests. The California Business Roundtable, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, kind of the sort of anti-tax business crowd.
Okay. James asks, are all local control formulas the same? How is local defined?
So the local control funding formula is just the name that Governor Brown's administration came up with this equity formula for schools. So that is, again, it makes sure that the money allocated to education goes to the districts that need that money the most, based on English language learners, low-income individuals, and foster youth.
Okay. Things like free and reduced lunch and that kind of indicator of, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. How much has been raised? Tony asks, how much has been raised on both sides to fund pro and con? What's the funding situation right now? We hope to raise $50 million by the end of this. And the other side has said they're going to spend over $100 million against us. We think that their
purposely holding off on some of their filings until we get to next month, because, if you go sort of to the Secretary of State's, website, they haven't really raised that much money. But we know that they will. And I think one of the reasons, and something that we're looking into now, are the groups that are funding the No campaign are not groups that are in line with Californians and California values. Right? The same people, the Koch brother type folks, the same people that are lining up behind anti-tax, Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump are also the people that are lining up behind the No here. And they know that's something that we can let people know. And so I think they're trying to hold off for as long as they can.
Yeah. Elaine asks, and maybe Elaine, you'll need to clarify. She asks, are assessors on board yet? And so you do understand that question.
Yeah, oh yes, certainly. The California Assessors Association is not supportive, but individual assessors are more supportive. And unfortunately, there's kind of a couple reasons why the assessors aren't that excited about it. One, it's more work for them. So, they've been sort of doing the same system for years. So the idea of creating more work for anyone after you've sort of done the same thing for decades is rough. But unfortunately, the way our system is set up here in California is that it's very county-based. And so while most of the people in California do live in bluer areas, LA and the Bay Area. And so that's why we're a majority Democratic state, but the counties themselves are actually mostly Republican, mostly conservative. So when they have one assessor per each county, the majority of assessors are going to be voting no on this, not just because it's more work, but also based on the grounds that they are ideologically opposed.
I see. That's really interesting, challenging. Christine asks, does this proposition apply to funding to both urban and rural communities across the state?
Yes, certainly. Every county in the state is going to receive more revenue from this. More revenue is going to go to the coastal counties where there is more commercial property. But part of the equity formula that was mentioned before in terms of education funding means that some of the rural, lower income counties will definitely see a large boost in at least the education portion of the funding.
Okay. So further questions from everyone attending? We have time for a couple more. If
I just like to say, in addition, and if there's any other questions, Marilyn, please feel free to cut me off. But it's really interesting. The assessor's question has been something that has perplexed us for the duration of this campaign. And the assessors say, oh, this is going to be really hard to implement, and all these sort of things. And then you really have to look at, well, how does the rest of the country do it? How is it that here, the home of Silicon Valley, we can't figure this out, but somehow they're able to do this in Houston and Chicago and New York and Dallas and all these other big places, right? And so it's something that we can do here. So when we hear, anyone saying, oh, well, the assessors say this is too hard, it's like, well, that's not a very can-do attitude, especially in this time. Right, where we are desperate for revenue because of the economic crisis that we're in. They need to be able to roll up their sleeves and implement this. And they will be given the money to do so. And they also, this is not something that they're going to have to do January 1st, 2 months after this election, right? There is certainly a phase-in period. And the advocates of this initiative want to do this so we can generate revenue. So again, 92% of the revenue comes just from 10% of commercial properties. So this is not something where they have to snap their fingers and reassess everything all at once. It's fairly common sense and straightforward.
Yeah, and Margot comments or asks, should there be a smidgen of a pay boost for assessors in the proposition?
Certainly, and I think part of the issue that assessors have, and sort of just, this is just, sort of me anecdotally talking, is that because they do not have that same job that other assessors do in other places, where they're sort of just, they don't have as much work to do and they're not bringing in as much revenue, the counties often don't fund their offices as well, right? They often don't get the credit that they deserve, but this is an opportunity for them to show how valuable they can be to counties. And so I think they're not seeing things, they're not seeing the larger picture here, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I have a list of actions that you recommended, and I'm going to paste those in the chat room. If you are familiar and comfortable with the chat room, you can save the chat room and the information will be there. So there it is, a list. And Rhonda's, I think, going to cover these actions in the closing remarks. And Rhonda, you will also comment that if for any reason you're not comfortable with the chat room and don't know how to save the chat room, you can email Elder Action and we will email you these lists, this list, so that it contains suggested actions, contact information, websites, email addresses and phone numbers, that sort of thing. Ben, do you want to just skim over what I've pasted here and make sure that it covers everything that you suggested as next steps?
Yeah, this looks great. Phone banking is a really, really important tool. Quite honestly, in this environment, we're not able to get out into the communities the way we would have hoped we would. So it means phone banking is very important. CARA, which is, some of you are familiar with, the California Alliance for Retired Americans, they're doing like phone banks, sort of elder to elder calls that you can do. Evolve is also hosting phone banks for folks that want to get involved there. If anyone wants to be out there more on this issue and learn more and how to sort of talk to their friends and neighbors about this, definitely join a speakers training. We think that really making your voice heard and signing our petition to the governor is really important. And when you do that, there's different boxes to check as well on other ways you want to get involved. And we'll have one of our organizers follow up with you on getting involved in those things. The last thing that I'll say is that if you all do have any specific questions, if you are hearing things in your communities about this, please do feel free to email me. We always want to know what's going on. This is a people-powered campaign. We honestly can't do this without all of you, right? I can't physically go and talk to enough voters that we need, but I do these a lot, and we get 50 people here, 50 people there, all of a sudden starting to tell all their friends and family. That's how we're able to win these things. That's how we're able to make real structural, important, lasting change. And this is an inspiring time right now. Because we do have a big opportunity here to move our state forward. And I fear that if we are unable to be successful with this, then we really have to figure out, okay, what are we going to cut? And that should not be a case that the 5th largest economy in the world is really thinking about, okay, what kind of permanent cuts are we having? We should be saying, we should be leading in our economic recovery, not falling behind. So I certainly appreciate you all for being here, and feel free to reach out if you ever need anything on this.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Rhonda to close out this event.
Thank you, Meryl. Thank you so much, Ben, and to our audience for your interest and attention. Here are 5 ways you can support Yes on 15 by getting friends, family, neighbors, members of other villages and nonprofits that we're part of to join us in action after we leave here today. First, you can watch and share the recording of the Zoom event in the Ashby Village YouTube channel. You can, as Ben said, join CARA, phone banks, elders to elders, definitely important. You can write handwritten letters to voters. Evolve will have this program up and running at the beginning of September. write op-ed letters to local papers or online. And as Ben said, you can sign up for speakers training with Schools and Communities First, present to your book group, synagogue, or church group. Speak about Proposition 15 to others around our state. And you can contribute to the Yes on Proposition 15. In closing, I want to remind you of upcoming Ashby Village virtual arts and cultural presentations. September 13th, Fiona Ma, California State Treasurer, will speak. And on the 22nd of September, Robert Reich, former U.S. Secretary of Labor, will tell us, quote, why we should take, no one should take a Biden-Harris victory for granted. So thanks again to the team of participants from Elder Action and to Eric Whitaker, our staff tech supporter. And as Meryl mentioned, if you have questions, you can email us at elderactionnow@gmail.com. So thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate